There are men who walk the earth, yet carry the weight of eternity in their voices. Men whose words open blind eyes, whose prayers awaken the crippled, whose laughter carries the fragrance of heaven. Among them stands a man called Reverend Dr. Ukpai, a vessel of grace, a preacher of faith, and one of God's finest generals to walk the soil of Africa. Born in January 1945 in the small town of Asaga Ohafia, Abia State, his beginning was not paved with gold or privilege. He lost his father while still a tender boy, and with that loss came hardship so fierce it could have buried his dreams. Yet, even then, something within him whispered that his life would not end in obscurity. In those days, when other boys dreamt of wealth or politics, young Uma carried a different fire. Once, when the governor of eastern Nigeria visited his school and asked the children what they wished to become, one said a doctor, another a lawyer. But Uma, with childlike boldness and divine certainty, declared, "I will be a preacher." All those who heard him may have laughed that day, but heaven did not. Heaven took note. His journey was not smooth. The death of his father nearly halted his education, and even family members who could have helped turned their backs on him because of his growing Christian faith. Still, he worked, saved, and fought his way through school, not knowing that God was quietly shaping a vessel that would one day carry revival fire across continents. Years later, as a teenager, a moment would change his life forever. One afternoon, a madman named Deco stormed into his school, naked and violent. Students fled in fear, but Uma heard a strange voice, a calm whisper within his soul saying, "You can make him run too." It was his first encounter with divine authority. He stepped forward, trembling but obedient, and said, "In the name of Jesus, roll out of this school." The man fell to the ground and literally rolled out. That day, a young boy discovered that faith was not theory, it was power. From that encounter, Uma's ministry began. His headmaster, in awe, appointed him to lead morning prayers. At that young age, the boy who once doubted himself became the spiritual shepherd of his school. What began as a school devotion would one day become a global movement of faith, miracles, and revival. But God never raises a general without testing his heart. Uma's path was filled with battles, spiritual, emotional, and personal. After giving his life to Christ in 1958, he would come to know pain and loss that could have broken the average man. He would bury loved ones, lose children, lose properties, and still rise to preach hope. He once shared how, years later, God spoke to him saying, "I will not answer your prayers today. I want to test how much you love me." That morning, his office was raided by robbers. His equipment was stolen, his ministry work shattered. Not long after, tragedy struck again, a vehicle accident that claimed members of his team and almost took the life of his beloved wife. Yet he did not curse God. He wept, but he worshipped. He mourned, but he preached. And while preparing for another crusade, God spoke again, "Because you handled that case well, you will be seen everywhere. I have assigned 100 angels to walk with you wherever you go." From that moment, the tide of his ministry changed. Across cities and nations, from Lagos to London, from Ghana to Miami, the same power followed him. Crowds gathered in hundreds of thousands. Cripples walked, barren women conceived, and the broken found hope. Wherever he stood, the air itself seemed to respond to faith. But beyond the miracles, it was his gentleness, his humor, and his unwavering belief in God's promises that drew men to him. To hear him speak was to feel peace, a peace that came from a man who had walked through fire and found God waiting on the other side. His ministry was not built on fame, but on faith. In an age where some men of God chased influence, Uma chased intimacy with God. He would fast for years, not out of pride, but out of hunger for power from above. His wife, in concern, once told him, "You will fast until you make me a widow." He smiled and said softly, "I am only avoiding a life with less of God." There was a governor who once mocked his faith. "I will believe in your God only if a man born cripple walks in your crusade," he said privately, thinking no one had heard. But the Spirit revealed his words to Uma. During that crusade, the preacher called out those who were born cripple, and 2 siblings were brought to him. He began to sing to God, and as he did, the crowd fell silent. Then, suddenly, the power of God swept through the place like a mighty wind. The crippled children stood, walked, and ran to embrace the very governor who had doubted. Tears flooded his face, not of shame, but of surrender. The governor found God that night. Uma's life is proof that faith is not a doctrine, it is a weapon. He often said, faith accepts God's verdict even when it hurts. Faith heals others and can heal you too. But faith also demands sacrifice. Years of fasting left him with a damaged intestine. He vomited blood daily, and doctors warned that he might die without surgery. Still, he refused to rest. He said, I would rather die preaching than die on a hospital bed. When invited to preach in Togo, he went, sick but obedient. Each night, he healed others. Each morning, he vomited blood. On the final day, he prayed, Lord, when will you heal me? And God replied, when you return to Nigeria, eat gari. The very food doctors said could kill him. He obeyed. His wife protested, but he insisted. This is what God said. He ate, slept deeply for hours, and woke up healed, never to vomit blood again. This was the Ukpai the world came to know, a man whose faith outlived his pain, whose obedience birthed miracles. He would go on to establish medical outreaches, schools, and crusades that drew millions. Yet through it all, he remained simple, laughing easily, never rushing, never bitter, just a man at peace with his Creator. In the quiet of his heart, he often reminded those who listened, rest refreshes a man, rest repositions a man, rest redirects a man. He believed that the secret of ministry was not in power or popularity, but in surrender. From a little boy who declared he would be a preacher, to a global evangelist who healed nations, Ukpai's story is not about fame. It is about faith that refused to die. Even legends bleed. Even God's generals have nights when the heavens grow silent. But it is in that silence that faith is proven, and few have carried that faith like Reverend Dr. Ukpai. Over the years, he would face storms that could have drowned any man. Yet every test seemed to polish his spirit, until pain itself became his pulpit. When he spoke of faith, it wasn't theory, it was survival. When he preached healing, it wasn't history, it was his own story retold through the mercy of God. He often said, faith is rugged and loaded. The path we missed is faith. Our God is always available where faith is available. That single sentence became the compass of his life, the reason why he feared nothing, not even death, not even Satan himself. In 1985, inside a quiet hotel room, Uma had an encounter that would mark him forever. He said a figure walked into his room without the door opening. Calmly, the visitor spoke, I am Satan. For a moment, fear tried to rise, but faith stood taller. Uma looked at him and said, you are too late. My heart already belongs to God. Later, God would explain, all those the devil will use to humiliate you, forgive them. When you forgive, you make nonsense of his plans. From that day, forgiveness became Uma's greatest weapon. He learned that love disarms the devil faster than shouting does. And from that revelation, his ministry deepened. It became more than power. It became character. Time and again, his life became a school of faith. Once, at a pastors' convention in ORE in 1992, he had taken over 200 hotel rooms for ministers of the gospel. A young man approached him, claiming to be a pastor, begging for accommodation. Uma, discerning deception, refused. The young man insisted, and in that moment, something divine happened. Uma said, if you are not what you claim, let God judge you now. The man fell to the ground, lifeless. Accusations erupted, you've killed him. But Uma stayed calm. He looked to heaven and said, Father, if my friends judge me wrongly, what will my enemies say? Then came the voice of God again, call his name 7 times. Uma obeyed. On the 7th call, the man coughed, opened his eyes, and rose to his feet alive. The room fell into holy silence. Uma simply whispered, there is power in spoken word. His faith was not loud, it was alive. Those who listened to him knew this was a man whose it was permanently connected to the heart of God. He said once, faith comes by hearing, not just reading, but hearing the voice of God. In the decades that followed, his crusades became rivers of healing. From Nigeria to Europe, from the dusty fields of Africa to the polished arenas of America, he preached one simple message: God is still God. Crowds gathered in hundreds of thousands, yet his message never changed. Whether standing before presidents or peasants, he spoke with the same tenderness, the same conviction. At Greater Lagos for Christ in 1985, over 5,000 choristers and 7,000 counselors joined his call for revival. That crusade gave birth to the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria, PFN, a movement that now unites churches and voices across the nation. Umar would later serve as the national vice president of PFN, yet he never stopped calling himself a servant. He built the King of Kings Medical Outreach International, which today stands as a 100-bed specialist hospital in Abia State, a reflection of his belief that healing is both spiritual and medical. He also began the 1 Million Man Crusade, a divine assignment to break the curses and inferiority that held the African man bound. Through it all, he remained a student of life. He pursued education with uncommon passion, from the School of Journalism and Television in the United Kingdom to Christian colleges in the United States, earning degrees in divinity and theology. But even with all his certificates, he would often smile and say, "The greatest certificate is the one heaven gives, the anointing." Yet, what truly set him apart was his simplicity. Despite his global influence, he never neglected his covenant to return home to UEO every Wednesday to minister at Victory Cathedral, his home base. Thousands would gather there weekly, not because of fame, but because of the presence of God that followed him like a shadow. At home, he was not the general. He was a husband and father, married to his beloved Philomena since 1975, with 6 children and 1 adopted child. His family became a living sermon of grace. He would say often, "When you marry peace, you live long." His laughter was medicine, his humility contagious. In interviews, when asked how he remained strong after decades of ministry, he would chuckle. "Sometimes, secrets are not made known to men. But when you marry a good woman, eat good food, and rest in God, you will outlive your fears." He believed rest was sacred. Rest refreshes a man, rest repositions a man, rest redirects a man. That was his secret: resting, not quitting. Even his miracles carried simplicity. Once, a crippled boy was brought to him, accused of being bewitched by his aunt. Umar refused to pray. Instead, he told the father, "Go tell your sister that if by 8 in the morning this boy doesn't walk, she herself will become crippled." By dawn, the boy rose and walked just as spoken. Another time, a young woman brought to him in chains was instantly freed when her grandfather unlocked a buried coffin at the backyard, a coffin that held her spiritual life captive. She went on to graduate with first-class honors in mathematics. These were not stories told for fame. They were testimonies, living proofs that the God of the Bible still walks among men. And yet, through all the noise, Umar never forgot the source. He once said, "A man who is not paid to do what he is doing has obligated God to pay him what is due." He never took a salary. He never demanded a fee. He lived by faith, and faith never failed him. To his last breath, he continued to teach that the secret to power is surrender. He reminded all who listened, "If you will not turn to God through faith, you will remain unusable for Him." His story is not just about miracles, it is about mercy. It is not about fame, it is about faith. He walked with God until the lines between earth and heaven blurred. His words became prayer. His life became a message. And so, we remember him not as a celebrity preacher, but as a man who dared to believe God without question. A man who turned pain into testimony, tragedy into teaching, and faith into fire. From the quiet hills of Ohafia to the great cities of the world, his voice still echoes, calm, tender, powerful. A voice that reminds us that faith still works, miracles still happen, and God still speaks. I want you to say a prayer in the comment section for our daddy in the comment section, and make sure you like this video. For more documentary like this, make sure you subscribe.